The handcuffs were already out when Nathan Holt pulled into the gravel drive. He saw the cruiser first, parked at an angle across the entrance to the barn, deliberate, the way law enforcement parks when it wants to make a statement about who controls the geometry of a situation. Then, he saw the old man. 81 years old, standing in front of the barn door in his work boots and canvas jacket, with his wrists at his sides and his chin up. The way men stand when they have decided that whatever is coming, they will meet it on their feet. Then, he saw the sheriff. Wade Cutter was not a large man, but he had learned early that authority is not about size, and had spent 19 years in Granger County, Montana, perfecting the particular combination of legal power and unhurried menace that makes people comply without being able to say exactly why. He had the cuffs swinging from 2 fingers, the way men swing things they expect to use. He was talking. The old man was listening. And nobody else on that property was moving. Except the dog. Maverick had come off the passenger's seat before the truck finished stopping. 92 pounds of black and tan German Shepherd, standing at the edge of the gravel with his body locked and his ears fully forward and his amber eyes on Wade Cutter's back. And he had not made a sound. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and follow it all the way to the end. What happens next is something nobody on that property was prepared for, and neither are you. Stay with us. Staff Sergeant Nathan Holt, retired, was 40 years old and had the kind of build that announces itself before a man speaks, 6'2", 215, with broad shoulders that had spent 12 years under a pack and a posture so ingrained it had stopped being military and become simply the shape of him. His hair was dark and cut close on the sides, going gray at the temples with the slightly early progression of men who have carried particular kinds of weight. His jaw was square and set, and held a week's growth that he maintained by neglect rather than design. His eyes were a clear, serious green-gray that people remembered after meeting him without always being able to say what color they were. The kind of eyes that filed everything they saw without appearing to, that measured a room in the time it took most people to cross it, and that carried in their stillness the particular quality of someone who has learned that the way you receive information determines whether you can use it. He was not a man who looked for trouble. He was, however, a man who recognized it immediately and had never once turned away from it. He had served 3 deployments with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, Sangin District in 2009, Helmand Province in 2012, and a forward advisory position in Kunduz Province in 2015 that put him in places that appeared on no briefing maps available to the general public, and that he had signed documents agreeing never to specify. He had come home from Kunduz with a Navy Commendation Medal with combat fee, a permanent clicking in his left knee from a vehicle dismount gone wrong on a mountain road in October, and a quiet that had settled into him so completely that his own brother had asked, at Christmas that year, whether Nathan was doing all right. Nathan had said yes, which was true in the ways that mattered, and incomplete in the ways that were harder to say. He had bought 40 acres outside Dillon, Montana, 2 years after discharge, which was not enough land to be a working ranch, and was exactly enough land to be a life, and he ran fence-line contract work for neighboring properties, and kept himself in the particular way of men who have stopped waiting for civilian life to feel the way they thought it would, and have decided to live the one they actually have. Instead, he had come to the Alderman property that morning because Earl Alderman had called him the night before and asked if Nathan had an extra come-along he could borrow, which was the specific kind of question that meant Earl needed a hand and would not directly say so. Which was the specific kind of communication pattern Nathan had spent 3 years learning to read, because Earl Alderman did not ask for help any more directly than a fence post leans, but he leaned. Maverick was a 7-year-old German Shepherd with a coat of dense black and rich tan that had the particular depth of color that comes from good genetics and years of outdoor life, darkening along the spine and shoulders to near black in certain light. He weighed 92 pounds, distributed across a chest and neck that reflected 12 months of working the fence lines of Nathan's 40 acres and the considerable physical history of 4 years as a military working dog before that. His left ear bore a clean notch along the outer edge where a brass fragment from an indirect fire incident in Helmand Province had clipped it in 2018 during his final deployment under a handler named Corporal Yates, who had come home and had driven 3 states to hand the dog personally to Nathan at the adoption processing facility in Yuma, which was not required, and which Nathan had never forgotten. The scar was small and smooth, and Maverick moved through the world as though he had never been given a reason to be cautious, which was not naivety, but the opposite of it. The absolute confidence of a dog who has assessed the world and decided it is navigable. He did not react to noise, to other animals, to strangers or crowds or weather. He reacted to wrongness. And standing at the edge of Earl Alderman's gravel drive on a cold October morning, every line of his body said the same word: wrong. The Alderman property sat 8 miles north of Dillon on a county road that had been paved once, 30 years ago, and had returned to gravel with a certain amount of inevitability since then. The October light came across it flat and clean, and the cottonwoods along the irrigation ditch had gone full yellow, and the barn was red and straight, and the house was white with a green metal roof, and the whole of it had the particular look of land that has been worked honestly for a long time. Earl Alderman had farmed it for 53 years, inheriting it from his father, who had inherited it from his, and the land bore the particular quality of places that have been loved by people who did not confuse love with comfort, but understood it as the daily discipline of showing up regardless. A thin line of smoke came from the farmhouse chimney. The air smelled of frost and cut grass, and the faint diesel signature of equipment recently run. Nathan left the engine running and walked toward the barn with Maverick at his knee. Earl Alderman was 81 years old and had the physical presence of a man who had spent his life in weather. He was not tall, 5'10", maybe, worn down a notch by age, but he was built in the horizontal direction of men who have done heavy work for 6 decades, broad through the back and chest, with hands that were so consistently scarred and calloused that they had become simply his hands, the way old tools become the shape of their use. His face was a map of outdoor years, creased and weathered and deeply particular, and his eyes were the clear pale blue of high country sky, and they were looking at Wade Cutter with the expression of a man who has no fear of another man, but has a considerable and well-founded fear of what that man can do with a badge. Wade Cutter was 47 years old and had been sheriff of Granger County for 19 years, which was long enough that the distinction between the office and the man had blurred in ways that were convenient for the man. He was lean and dry, with a close-trimmed mustache and the settled ease of institutional power worn so long it had become posture. His department vehicle was a new model, bought from the county budget. His personal truck, parked outside the county lot, was also new, which on a sheriff's salary in Granger County required a certain kind of explanation that nobody in a position to ask had ever requested. He had 3 deputies who did what they were told, and a county commissioner who owed him a favor dating to 2019 that had been large enough to generate ongoing deference. He had been sheriff long enough that people in Granger County had stopped imagining it differently, which was a different thing from being satisfied with it, and which Cutter had learned to rely upon. He had been in conflict with Earl Alderman for 11 months over a matter of water rights and a boundary survey that a company called Ridgecrest Land Partners had commissioned in the spring. a Denver-based development firm that had acquired 600 acres of adjacent grazing land and was now pursuing an agricultural conversion permit that required, in its current configuration, access to an irrigation headgate that had sat on Alderman family land since 1961. Earl had the deed. He had the water rights documentation. He had a lawyer in Dillon who had sent 3 letters. Ridgecrest had a different lawyer and a longer relationship with the county planning office than Earl's lawyer did, and Wade Cutter had attended 2 dinners in Bozeman with Ridgecrest's regional director in the past year, the existence of which was not a matter of public record. That morning's visit was ostensibly about a misdemeanor trespass complaint. A Ridgecrest surveyor had allegedly been blocked from crossing Earl's land to access the disputed headgate area 3 days prior. Earl said he had asked the man to leave his property, and the man had left. Cutter said that constituted obstruction. The handcuffs were not, Nathan thought, a proportionate response to that allegation. They were a message. They were Wade Cutter telling Earl Alderman, and everyone who might hear about it, what it cost to be difficult. "Morning, Sheriff," Nathan said. Cutter turned. He registered Nathan the way men register unexpected variables, with the particular flatness of someone recalibrating. He registered Maverick, who had stopped 6 feet away and was still doing exactly what he had been doing since the truck stopped, standing, locked, amber eyes on Cutter. "Silent, private property," Cutter said. "This isn't your business." "Earl called me," Nathan said. "I'm his neighbor." He looked at Earl. "You doing all right?" "I'm being arrested," Earl said, with a dryness that suggested he found the situation less frightening than insulting, "for asking a trespasser to leave my own land." Nathan looked at Cutter. "What's the charge?" "Obstruction of a county official in the performance of lawful duties," Cutter said. "The surveyor wasn't a county official," Nathan said. "He was a private contractor." Cutter's eyes went to Maverick again. The dog had not moved. "You need to get your animal back in the vehicle," Cutter said. "He's not doing anything," Nathan said. "I'm giving you a lawful order." "He's standing on a public road easement," Nathan said. "That's not a lawful order. That's a preference." The temperature between the 2 men changed in a way that had nothing to do with the October air. Cutter put the handcuffs back on his belt with the deliberateness of a man who is not retreating, but is choosing his moment, and he looked at Nathan with the expression of someone updating a file. "You live out on Route 9, he said. 8 miles south, Nathan said. "Nice property," Cutter said, and then he got in his cruiser and backed out of the drive at the speed of a man who has other tools and is not finished. Earl watched the cruiser until it reached the county road. Then he let out a breath that he had clearly been holding for the entirety of the preceding conversation, and looked at Nathan with the pale blue eyes that had been looking at this land for 53 years, and right now looked very tired. "Third time this month," Earl said. Nathan stayed 4 hours. He didn't borrow the come-along. He sat at Earl's kitchen table and listened, which was the thing that was needed, and what came out in 2 hours of coffee and careful telling was the shape of something that had been building for nearly a year. The Ridgecrest surveys, the letters from Earl's lawyer that went unanswered or were answered by the county planning office with responses that cited procedural delays and incomplete documentation. Delays that seemed to resolve promptly whenever the other party was involved. A conversation Earl had with his neighbor to the east, a man named Grover Walsh, 74 years old, 22 years on his property, in which Grover had described his own recent visit from Cutter, following a separate boundary complaint, following his own refusal to sign a right-of-way agreement with Ridgecrest. Grover had signed, in the end. He had not said why in terms Earl could exactly repeat, but the manner of his telling it said enough. And 3 weeks ago, a note left on Earl's door. No signature. Typed, it said, "You are not the only one he has done this to. There are others. If you are willing to say so, so are we." Earl had kept the note in a coffee can on the second shelf of the kitchen cabinet behind the cornmeal. He brought it out and set it on the table. Nathan read it twice. Maverick, who had been lying near the kitchen door, stood up and walked to the table and put his chin on Earl's knee. Earl looked at the dog for a moment. He set one large, scarred hand on Maverick's head. "I'm 81 years old," Earl said. "I've been on this land my whole life. My grandfather broke this ground." He looked at the note. "I'm not signing anything." "You don't have to," Nathan said. He made 4 calls that afternoon from his truck parked at the end of Earl's drive. The first was to a veterans advocacy attorney in Missoula named Claire Dufresne, who specialized in rural property rights and who Nathan had met twice at a VISO event in Butte, and who had, both times, struck him as the kind of lawyer who regarded injustice the way a border collie regards an unpenned flock. He told her what he knew. She asked 12 questions in 4 minutes and said she would need to see the deed documentation, the water rights filing, the correspondence from the county planning office, and the name of the Ridgecrest regional director. He gave her everything he had. She said she would call him back by morning. The second call was to a former platoon brother named Hayes Draper, who now ran investigative compliance for a land use watchdog organization out of Billings with a particular focus on rural Montana development conflicts. Nathan told him about Ridgecrest and the dinners in Bozeman. Hayes said, "How many times has Cutter shown up at this man's property?" Nathan said 3. Hayes said, "Give me 48 hours." The third call was to Grover Walsh, to tell him that Earl had not signed and was not going to, and to ask whether Grover would be willing to describe his own experience in writing if it came to that. Grover was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I've been waiting for someone to ask me that for 6 months." The fourth call was to Earl, to tell him to deadbolt his door and call Nathan's number, not the county, if Cutter came back before morning. Cutter came back at 7:15 the following morning with 2 deputies and a signed arrest warrant for obstruction, and what the warrant described as interference with lawful government process. He came in 2 vehicles this time. He knocked on the front door. Nathan had slept on Earl's couch. Maverick had slept on the floor beside the door, which he had not moved from in the 11 hours since Nathan had come back inside at dusk. Nathan opened the door. Cutter saw Nathan and reset. He saw Maverick behind Nathan and the dog's body language, not threat posture, something more deliberate than threat posture, the absolute. Rooted stillness of an animal that has placed itself and will not be moved by request, force, or authority, and Cutter's expression shifted in the small, specific way of a man who has just encountered a fact that wasn't in his plan. "I have a warrant," Cutter said. "I know," Nathan said. "Claire Dufresne is Earl's attorney of record as of 6 this morning. Her number is on this card." He held it out. "She asks that you serve any legal process through her office and wants you to know she filed a formal complaint with the Montana Department of Justice at 7 a.m. regarding a pattern of selective enforcement in Granger County that she'll be happy to walk you through. She also asks that you're aware that Hayes Draper at the Montana Land Rights Watch has been in contact with the Billings Gazette since yesterday afternoon regarding Ridgecrest land partners and their county relationships." Nobody moved. Behind Nathan, Earl Alderman stood with his hands at his sides and his chin up, which was the same way he had been standing the morning before. But the quality of it was different now. Not the bracing of a man waiting for an impact, but the stillness of a man who has decided the impact is not coming. Maverick stepped forward 1 pace onto the porch. He did not growl, He did not bare his teeth. He simply stepped forward and looked at Wade Cutter with the amber-eyed, unhurried attention of an animal who has done this before, in hotter places, with worse men, and has never once been the one to look away first. One of the deputies looked at the other deputy. Cutter took the card. He looked at it for a long time. He looked at Maverick. He looked at Nathan with the expression of a man doing a calculation and not arriving at a number he liked. "This isn't over," he said. "Probably not," Nathan said. But the next part happens, in front of a judge. Cutter walked back to his vehicle. The deputies followed. The three of them drove out of the Alderman property the same way the day before, at the speed of men who are not retreating, but are choosing their moment. Except this time, the moment was not coming back. The formal complaint filed by Claire Dufresne with the Montana Department of Justice triggered a review that expanded in its second week to include the County Planning Office and a records request covering 5 years of land use decisions in Granger County involving Ridgecrest land, partners and affiliated development entities. Hayes Draper's contact at the Billings Gazette ran the first story in November. A second story in December named Ridgecrest's regional director and documented 2 dinners with Cutter at a Bozeman steakhouse with dated receipts obtained through a public records request. Grover Walsh gave a written statement. So did 3 other landowners. The state attorney general's office opened a formal inquiry in January. Wade Cutter resigned in February. He did not contest the civil findings. Ridgecrest Land Partners withdrew their conversion permit application in March, citing changed project parameters, which was a way of saying that the project had become expensive in a way that had nothing to do with construction costs. Earl Alderman's water rights were formally confirmed by the county in April, a confirmation that was legally unnecessary. The rights had never been in genuine dispute, but that Earl said he appreciated having in writing all the same. By the following June, Nathan was running a loose Saturday arrangement with Earl that had started as fence work and become something else. Not quite what a son does, because Earl had a son in Billings who came when he could, but the thing that happens between 2 men who live 8 miles apart and have found that each other's company requires no explanation. Maverick had decided that Earl's property was worth a thorough inspection every visit and conducted one systematically, covering the fence lines and the barn and the irrigation ditch and the cottonwoods along the creek, returning each time to the kitchen porch with the satisfied expression of a dog who has found the situation acceptable. Earl gave him biscuits from a tin on the second shelf. Nathan had given up, mentioning that this was not a habit he should be encouraging. One Saturday in June, Nathan sat on the porch steps while Earl finished the week's last fence check, and the evening light came low and gold across the hay meadow, and the cottonwoods made the particular sound they make in a light wind, not quite rustling, more like breathing, and Maverick lay beside him on the step with his chin on Nathan's boot and his tail moving in the slow, satisfied way of a dog who has come to consider a place his. The knee clicked when Nathan stood. The partial deafness made the birdsong sound like birdsong from the next room. Neither thing had changed. He had not expected either thing to change. What had changed was the quality of the land he was sitting on. Not his, not legally, but the kind of present in it that comes from being somewhere that has been defended, that exists now because someone refused to let it not exist. He understood that feeling in his body the way he understood certain things from service, not as an idea, but as a truth that had already been paid for. Sometimes miracles don't come as thunder from the sky. Sometimes they arrive as a truck turning into a gravel drive at the right moment, and a dog who steps off a passenger seat and plants himself in the cold morning air and refuses, not aggressively, not with noise, but with the absolute conviction of his body, to move. God does not always send armies to defend the people who deserve defending. Sometimes he sends one man and one dog, and the particular courage that comes from having already been in worse places than this, and having come out the other side with your word intact. Earl Alderman stood on his grandfather's land for 53 years without asking anyone to fight his battles for him. He asked, one night, if a neighbor had a come-along he could borrow. Sometimes that is the whole of what it takes. Someone who notices the lean and shows up and doesn't leave until the weight has shifted. Hold your ground. Call your neighbor. And never underestimate the dog who doesn't move. If Earl's story moved you today, share it with someone who is holding on to something that someone else is trying to take. A home. A piece of land. A piece of dignity. Tell them, hold on. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And tell us this. Have you ever had someone show up for you when you didn't know how to ask? Your story may be the courage someone else needs to pick up the phone tonight. If you believe in stories of loyalty, justice, and the men and dogs who defend the ground worth defending, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next journey. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you always that the land beneath your feet and the people who stand beside you are worth every fight. You are never alone.